ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain speaking, and we're going to delve off of a normal flight and just have a little solo flight here. My idea behind this is just to give you a little update in what's been happening in the news since we published and aired our last show. Right now, one of the major things that is happening across the airwaves, it's falling like a torrential storm and creating turbulence throughout our little broadcast here, is the news of what has happened at the Grand Mosque in Mecca. This happened directly on the 14th anniversary of 9/11. The Grand Mosque, where the Kabbalah stone, or however they say it, is stored, one of the holiest of holies for Sunni Muslims over there in Saudi Arabia, where they do their Hajj, their pilgrimage, has been struck by lightning, causing a crane to cave in on the ceiling, falling through layers of that old mosque. And I believe the death toll is now up to 107 and several hundred wounded or injured. Now this is kind of interesting because it's diametrically opposed to the sort of imagery that was seen on the eve of 9/11 and the 14th anniversary yesterday at Manhattan, when a rainbow was seen over the city and also over the site of the new World Trade Center. It's hard to imagine that it's been 14 years since those dastardly and cowardly attacks took place, and the way that it shook the United States of America and changed everything about our culture. It is hard to imagine that it's been that long. And as Jeremy and I discussed on our previous show, it was just a frightening time for everyone involved, because what had happened is we had been attacked merely for being who we are, and for believing in what we believe, and for having the Constitution of the United States as one of the bedrock principles and foundational doctrines of our entire country. It is quite clear that these Islamofascists hate and despise everything about the United States of America. They hate and despise everything about you and me. And of course, we have to be vigilant to the sort of threat that they really pose to us, because they will not back down. Fanatical enemies like these, which are much like the enemy that we faced from the Empire of Japan during World War II, these kinds of enemies never back down, because they are so committed to what they believe that they will throw everything at it. In fact, they believe that they will receive a better life in the afterlife by throwing their life away here. That's, of course, diametrically opposed to everything that we value here in the United States. Unless you look at Planned Parenthood, then, of course, they operate off of an entirely different value system altogether. And, of course, that is still brewing into a huge brouhaha and scandal, which I think it's going to be very difficult for them to come back from. Nevertheless, this type of imagery that we're seeing juxtapose the rainbow, not the perverted rainbow as it has been by the gay movement, but the actual rainbow. If you remember, that's the sign of the covenant that God gave to Noah after the flood had ended. And I guess that's why the gay movement has latched on to it as an attempt to normalize their behavior. I'm not going to delve into that. I don't care what sexual persuasion somebody has, just as long as they are not flaunting it towards me. I don't care. I don't define myself by my sexuality. I find it strange that there is this segment of the population that finds it necessary to do so, but they're free to do so as long as they don't use their beliefs as a form of tyranny and oppression to punish those who disagree with their lifestyle. And, you know, this comes to a greater point that is affecting all of us here in America, and that is this. Civil discourse has basically vanished and died. We don't have it anymore. We have now degraded to such a point that we feel that it is necessary to destroy anyone who disagrees with us, no matter what. And I especially see this on the left, far more so than on the right. When you look at the radical right, quote-unquote, and I'm using that term very, very vaguely and loosely here, but when you look at the true fringes of the right, so to say, they're libertarian. They're the types of live and let live, leave me alone. I just don't want to be bothered. But when you look at the extreme radical fringe of the left, which, by the way, I believe is taking control of the Democrat Party right now, you notice that they want to control everything, that they have to make it their way or no way at all. And they will use whatever step is necessary or whatever weapon that they have within their arsenal to make their vision come true. They won't back down. They don't believe in backing down. And they don't believe in live and let live. They believe in live and pester and destroy that which is different than me. And of course you see this also in the way that they approach the First Amendment. Many on the left will sit there and claim that they are these great acolytes of the freedom of expression and free speech and freedom of the press. But if you really think about it, are they? Let's look at the Southern Cross battle flag, the Confederate battle flag. Are they for free expression when it comes to that? No. They're trying now to tell school children all throughout the United States that they can't display the battle flag. They're trying to tear it from public view. They're trying to remove it wherever it is, and they're trying to whitewash history. Kind of like the Cultural Revolution that occurred in China under Mao Zedong. That is the exact type of mindset that we're dealing with here, folks. They are absolutely committed to erasing the traditional history of the United States and replacing it with some asinine system that makes no sense. They are hell-bent in pushing aside all that is good and great about the United States, and this is especially true when it comes to the great story of our founding. And they want to replace it. They want to replace it with socialism. You can see it in some of the reform histories that they're trying to do, where they want to start history after the Civil War, and they primarily want to focus on the establishment of the progressive movement. I know. We should all stop and pause for a moment to think about that and to reflect upon that. Why stop and focus on the progressive movement? Well, there's a reason behind that, folks. The reason that they want to stop and focus on the progressive movement is the progressive movement champions their ideology. This idea of progressively pushing the country further and further towards social Marxism or any type of Marxism, because they have embraced Marxism wholeheartedly. It is their very identity. And I'm sure if you look back at history, I'm sure you've all recall that Marx said that he is diametrically opposed to the fundamental building block of any society, and that being the family. He doesn't believe in a family. He thought that marriage was just state-sanctioned prostitution. Kind of sounds like the language that's used by third-wave feminists, doesn't it? Well, of course. Of course it sounds like that, because that is the language that they have embraced. That is the creed that they spew at the media, and the media is a ready and willing outlet for all of it. The media certainly has a biased agenda that they want to push forth, and they have a message that they want to let out, and they selectively tell the story as they see fit. Take, for instance, all of these refugee things that are happening in Europe. This is now being played as a humanitarian crisis, but they're downplaying the fact that in Germany, the Islamofascists are trying to recruit from these waves of supposed refugees. Many of these refugees were just living in Turkey and are using this as an opportunity to get free stuff. Think about that, folks. Here it comes. It's down to free stuff. Why is it that the socialists always want to throw out this idea of free stuff? You get freebies, you get free healthcare, you get free this, you get free that, but we're going to be anti-big business, anti-big oil, anti-big pharmaceutical, but they're never anti-big government. And it's funny, what they do to all of the private sector and to every one of us that is trying to make a living or wants to keep the money that we've earned, they project upon us the very attributes of the big system that they love and support the most, big government. You want to talk about somebody that's unfair? Somebody that creates a monopoly? Somebody that makes it to where you can't make a living? It's big government. If you think about it, the doctrine of sovereign immunity prevents you as a private citizen, or me as a private citizen, from bringing a lawsuit against the federal government unless the federal government gives us permission to do so. And this happens to a much less extent, or a more limited extent, at state-level governments, and hardly at all at municipal levels. Nevertheless, this notion of sovereign immunity really shows the dark and twisted evil side of big government. And it's why I wonder and ask these avowed socialists, people like Bernie Sanders, I want him to answer this question. Why do you think big government is so good? Why do you think it's good to have more and more things covered under the umbrella of sovereign immunity so that the people cannot seek a redress of grievances? Why are you so opposed to the Constitution of the United States? Those are the types of questions that these socialists, these supposed bastions and acolytes of true compassion champion. If you were a true acolyte of compassion, if you truly held any care for the American people in your heart, you would not try to limit the avenues that they could have to seek a redress for their grievances. And it's continued with this notion of collective bargaining with unions. Of course, that is what the socialists support because they don't like the idea of individual thought unless they're a leader. It's almost as though they have reduced themselves to being like insects. When you look at a hive of bees, the bees are drones except for the queen. Well, who's the queen? I guess in this case, for the liberals, which I really don't like to call them that, we'll just call them utopian socialists. For the utopian socialists, the queen bee was supposed to be Aunt Hillary. But all of a sudden, because of the private email server scandal, her campaign is collapsing around her. And no matter what she tries to do, she is simply unable to save her campaign. And that is a thorn in her side. And it is just fascinating to watch the left implode. But then they turn and run out Smiles Joe Biden. Now, I'm sorry. Joe Biden, this would be his third attempt at running. And this would probably be strike 3 and you're out. But apparently Joe Biden is popular with the people because they have this idea that he's somehow a moderate. Folks, if you just look at the man's voting record, and if you look who he has served as vice president for, there's nothing moderate about him at all. When he came out and he said that you don't need to have a full protection of the Second Amendment, you just have to have a shotgun. Joe, the Second Amendment is far more than about defending one's home. You're mistaking home for the physical structure of the home. It actually means defending one's homeland, defending one's political system, one's constitutional system of government, and it is one of those inalienable rights, those rights endowed to us by our Creator, meaning that you, an agent of the government, are not authorized to take away from us. No just government is authorized to infringe and encroach upon our fundamental liberties. That, too, is a notion that these utopian socialists don't want you to know about, or to think about, or to consider. Because if you consider that, and think about that, you have seen the light to absolution. Because absolution, at least in the political sense in the United States of America, is self-respect, self-accountability, and above all, self-responsibility. You cannot have rights without a duty attaching to the right. That means you have the right to say whatever you want. You can yell fire in a crowded theater. People misinterpret the court opinion discussing that, you can yell it, but if there is a harm, you must suffer the consequences therefrom. It's as simple as that. It really is. But the left tries to convolute that because they don't want you to think about that. They want you to be confined into this little box that somehow you will be neatly defined by what you believe and that is all you are. Because for them, that's all they believe. It's because they follow this asinine religion of statism. That is what they worship. And that is what they believe the end-all be-all is. And that must be a very lonely and tragic sort of life to live. Because it doesn't seem like the type of life I would want to live. I like being able to think for myself. I like being able to expand my horizons and boundaries, to see more, to learn more, to experience more. Because it is through that I come to this greater understanding of who I am and how I fit in to this greater society around me. And if you really think about it, that's one of the big picture items that the extreme left in this country, and indeed around the world, misses. If they care so much about society, and that's why they bow to the altar of socialism, why do they fail to realize that society is a fabric? It is a proverbial fabric, and the individual makes up the individual thread of that fabric. If the individual is weak, unable to care for itself, that fabric is inherently weak. It is a facade that is unfurling and crumbling and fraying at the edges, and it will just eventually fall apart. That is the ugly truth about socialism, and you'll never hear it from one of these utopian socialists because they are convinced that their dogma and their gospel of social Marxism is true, and the only thing that they can embrace. But all it is a bunch of semantics, a bunch of makeup and lipstick on a pig, but socialism is socialism is socialism. Ever since it first reared its ugly head, every place it is touched, it is like the opposite of the Midas touch. Everything turns to manure and crumbles. And unlike manure in the real world that can be used as fertilizer, nothing grows from it because it's poisoned. It's poisoned with cancerous doctrines like political correctness, like identity politics, like the idea that we need to just open our borders because we didn't build our country. No, somebody else built that. Just like what Obama said back on the campaign trail in 2012. When he told all of these small business owners, the very backbone of this country, the thing that has helped make this country the greatest, the people that have worked the hardest to build this country, he attacked them and said, you didn't build your small business. Some janitor that didn't put in the blood, sweat, tears, and toil that you did, he built that and deserves some of the credit for it, and we're going to redistribute the wealth. This is part of his fundamental transformation of the United States, and it's something that each and every one of us should reject. But, as we saw on Thursday, September 10th of this year being 2015, once again, the detente wing, or the establishment wing of the Grand Old Party, or GOP, has caved in and given Obama exactly what he wanted with the Iran nuclear deal. Why? Why do we even pretend to have an opposition party when the opposition party hands this imperial president everything that he wants on a silver platter? They have given him everything, absolutely everything he wants, and they have broken every promise that they have made to the electorate since the midterm elections of November of 2014. And if you've ever wanted to point a finger at anybody for why we are in a sad state, I am more livid with the supposed GOP than I am with the Democrats. At least I know the Democrats are going to shove the knife in my back. The GOP will sit there, smile, and lie to me and plunge the knife into my back when I least expect it. As far as I'm concerned, that's the more devious sort of enemy. That's the sort of person that does far more damage to the country than any of the others. Because they claim to support the proper scope and application of the United States Constitution and our constitutional form of government, but they turn their back on it every time, and they allow the federal government to continue to increasingly, incrementally encroach upon our fundamental rights and liberties. But enough is enough. We, as a country, have to come back to some sort of reality. We must realize that the poisonous type of system that this governmental facade and all of these acolytes running around playing a sycophantic game with the most imperial president in United States history cannot sustain itself. The type of debt we have right now is unsustainable. But I can say clearly, with a true and clear conscience right here and right now, that we could really save this country and bring this country back from the brink of destruction if we would simply embrace the tenets of federalism and the proper scope and application of government as outlined in the four corners of the United States Constitution. But in order to do that, we have to fundamentally transform government, not the country. You see, that's where Barack Obama had it completely wrong. He came at this from the elitist point of view that, no, the country and the people needed to change. And maybe that's why they're pushing to flood our borders with illegal aliens. But stop and think about this. It's not the country that requires fundamental transformation. It is the government that requires a fundamental transformation. Because we have to get back to this notion of, no, it is better to let the several states and the local governments handle this. Because the people exercise greater control over these levels of government. And those levels of government are better equipped to address the individualistic problems of the several states. That is why the Founding Fathers, in their infinite wisdom, created the system of federalism as it was. And that is why the United States Constitution has been the longest contiguously running constitution, standing constitution, in the history of humanity. That is quite an accomplishment. Especially when you consider that James Madison, who is considered the father of the Constitution, sat there and recorded in his journal during the convention, right after they had completed the draft, and said, "It's not a very good document, but it's the best that we could do at the time." That type of humility also reflects upon the true character and persona of the American people. It is that which reflects the best angels of our nature, not this notion of we need to have socialism, we need to have balkanization of the United States, and we need to continue to accept these identity politics that are tearing this country apart at the seams. Look at what's going on in Baltimore. The mayor came out and said, this settlement for, what was his name, Freddie Gray, I believe it was, for Mr. Gray's family, while it may appear to have a tinge upon the jury pool, and even though the judge said that no, they can't have that, it's not going to have an effect. Those 6 police officers have been crucified by the mainstream media. There is no way that those 6 defendants, which are maliciously charged, can get a fair and proper trial there in Baltimore. People are going to be tinged and colored by the riots that occurred there. So you're going to have one side that's going to be saying it's unfair, and you'll have the other side saying it's unfair no matter what the outcome is. One side will be pleased, the other side won't. That's not justice. Justice should always be about pursuing the truth. But far too many attorneys in the United States today, and far too many people connected with the Department of Justice, don't believe in finding the truth. You could redefine the Justice Department as the Just Us Department. They've bought in to the balkanization of the American character, spirit, and identity, hook, line, and sucker. But that poorly reflects upon the American spirit. And it certainly does not represent the vast majority of Americans. But the silent majority has now been silent not by their own free will and fruition. They've been gagged by this poisonous and cancerous doctrine of political correctness. Have you ever noticed, ever since Barack Obama took the reins of power in this country back in January of 2009, that we have been continually berated as racist if we ever disagree with him? The tired race card, faded, folded, and torn as it may be, they continue to play that at every corner. And it is not showing any signs of slowing down. In fact, the third wave feminists were getting really excited about their opportunity here with Hillary, and maybe that's why they're pushing for Pocahontas, Hiawatha Hussey Warren to run, because they want to pull the gender card next. Oh, you're just sexist. You know, it's like this alarming story that came out of a school where a 13-year-old boy kissed a 14-year-old girl. Well, he's been charged with second-degree assault. What? Maybe give him detention, maybe slap his wrist if you're going to punish him at all, but they were going to charge him with sexual assault and put him on the sex offender list for the rest of his life. It's this kind of asinine approach to the justice system that fails our country. It's this type of approach and madness that devalues equal protection under the law for us all. When they act like this, they strip all meaning from the law, and they turn the system into a joke, and it should never be treated that way. But why would we believe or have faith in the system when the system has been tarnished and purposefully corrupted to be used against us? That in and of itself is a danger that none of us should have to face, but we are all facing because of these radical and stubborn, inflexible people that are driven by some sort of mania. The utopian socialist wing is not operating out of a sense of care. They don't care. The only thing they care about is themselves, and to use the system to somehow propel themselves to greater heights while pushing down the rest of us. Does that sound like compassion? Or does that sound like greed? It's funny, they point the finger at us, and as always, they project. They project their own beliefs onto the rest of us. They point at us, and they say we're the greedy ones. We who believe in self-responsibility, accountability, and respect. Do they respect authorities? Look at the way they treat the police. I'm sure that some radical fringe group of the left has been pushing this sort of police violence. Are the police perfect? No. No profession is perfect. I can say this coming from one of the most hated professions, that as a lawyer. But they shouldn't be killed simply for doing their job, like that sheriff's deputy in Harris County. That's wrong. That's evil. That is evil incarnate. And yet, a lot of these groups, say like the Black Lives Matters groups, some of their followers were out there on Twitter saying, praising this. Some of the chants at their protests have been, kill all cops, or kill the pigs. It's like we're walking back in time to some 1970s Black Panther movement calling for black power and the eradication of whites. See, this balkanization is killing us. It is driving a wedge in this country, an unnecessary wedge, an evil wedge, a wedge that serves no purpose other than to sow the seeds of dissent and to push America towards the brink of falling apart. But that's not what we need. Yet that's what our current administration and leadership in this country is pushing for. We need a return to the national identity and character of the American people. When I was growing up, we said the Pledge of Allegiance in school every day. It was not even questioned. It was just what we did. But apparently, over the past 2 decades, we've been getting away from that. And it's been getting worse, incrementally worse. And with each incremental step, or progressive step, this is why they like to call themselves progressive, we're tearing down every moral fiber of this country and making ourselves weaker in the process. But that does not represent the true values of the United States of America. The true values of the United States of America are represented like that by that teenager in Harris County that went and guarded a female sheriff's deputy as she attempted to fill up her car. In fact, she was shocked by it. She turned around and asked him what he was doing there, and he said, "I'm here to protect you, to make sure that nothing happens to you." It is that kind of respect, that kind of patriotism that makes America great. And yet, I fear that that is becoming a rarity. Certainly, the media, being the mainstream media, would want you to view the country as that way. They want you to feel downtrodden. They want you to give up hope. Because they figure if you give up hope, you'll become complacent and you'll roll over and you'll let them just run you over. Don't do it. Don't let them have the pleasure of that. Because it is not their place to tear away your country from you. It is not their place to define who we are as a nation. Try as they may, they will never define the true character and spirit and identity of the American people. And the reason for that is, we define our own path. Those of us that truly embrace the tenets of federalism and the true spirit of the United States Constitution are those who are able to think for themselves, those that want to think for themselves, those that want to see this country excel. But if you want to see this country excel, you've got to embrace an entrepreneurial spirit. You've got to be willing to take a risk. You've got to be willing to take the painful moments that come along with the good. Because if you don't taste the bitter, how do you know what sweet is? How can you know how good sweet tastes if you've never experienced the bitter, harsh reality of life? But the most important lesson that you need to take from all of this is that no matter what they try to do to tear you down, you have to be able to persevere. You must be perseverant. You must keep working. You must keep striving. No matter what, you set your eyes on a goal and you set yourself to achieve it and you keep reaching for it no matter what happens. It is through that that good character is built. It is through that that success is obtained. It is through that and faith. But nobody can really teach that to you. You have to learn that on your own. And it's just like how you can't judge an entire nation by the radical fringes. You have to judge it by what you experience on your own, by the real people you meet, not by the facade that the mainstream media is attempting to portray to you. The mainstream media has been engaged in this sensationalization for ages. And when they used to pepper their agenda and push it forward, as they did under the auspices of William Randolph Hearst, say at the time of the Spanish-American War, it was known as yellow journalism. And it was ridiculed across the nation as quackery. But now, all of the so-called journalists go out and do this sloppy reporting and push an agenda. You know, it's frightening to think that most of the stories that we see in the American media today, whenever they do have any dirt, are always based on sources which only speak on a condition of anonymity. To only speak on a condition of anonymity tells me that there is something missing. But it also speaks to the venomous culture that is plaguing our nation's capital. That is a den of ill repute if ever there has been one. And I don't like to think of the way that it corrupts those that go there. But I've seen it with my own eyes. I'll recall the first time that I ever went to Washington, D.C. It was back when I was in the 6th grade, and we were on a school trip, and we were in the Capitol building, and I remember there was a lobbyist, an anti-tobacco lobbyist, running down some of the stairs around the rotunda. He had a lit cigar in his mouth. And that image has stuck with me ever since. All these years later, that image still I can see vividly in my mind's eye. Because he was the personification of the sort of hypocrisy that we see in the nation's capital. And he was the great embodiment of the sort of madness that exists within the halls of government. And it's that kind of atmosphere, that kind of poisonous atmosphere, toxic, noxious atmosphere that corrupts those that go there. Because as soon as they get there, they discover that they can earn easy money. You know, congressmen and women, whether they be representatives or senators, are exempt from insider trading laws. You remember we threw Martha Stewart behind bars because she supposedly engaged in insider trading. But our alleged civil servants, you know, the ones that are supposed to work for we, the people, the true sovereigns of this country, they engage in that sort of activity each and every day, and they grow rich off of us. And they fill these bills with pork to try and make their people feel complacent and happy. Bread and circuses is all that is, folks. Bread and circuses. We need to get back to the true fiber of what makes this country great. We need to embrace, once again, the tenets that make us strong. But we can't do that as long as we are looking to Washington to solve our problems. If we are ever going to solve the problems here in America, we have to look within, and we have to do it from the ground up. We have to, first of all, repair our municipal governments, then our county governments, then our state governments. Because when you get to the state government, that is the government with plenary or near absolute power and authority. And they have been operating in such a way that they are not working for their own best interests because they think that they'll get easy money from the feds. But the federal government operates much like the mafia, and if you take money from them, there are always strings attached to it. And we have sure lost a lot of the original framework of federalism through this sort of backhanded, backroom dealing. Because it is always the constituency and the electorate that get the short end of the stick with these kinds of dealings. It's always we, the people, that have to carry the burden of it all. Why should hard-working, decent Americans be forced to give up ever greater portions of their paycheck to pay for those who are unwilling to work? Why is it that whenever you get the government involved, say like with school tuition and student loans, that the costs always go up exponentially. It's because government never works in an efficient manner. Government's opposed to efficiency. Bureaucracy is a mindless system that churns out more and more regulations. I like to call it death by regulation, because that's what they do. They make a noose out of red tape, and they put it around anyone who is trying to accomplish anything's neck, and strangle the life out of them. They try and take away everything that they have accomplished, everything that they have built for themselves. But is that good? No, it's not good. And it doesn't represent what we are capable of. But the powers that be in the federal government, or indeed at any level of government, don't care about that. They just care about expanding the boundaries of their own power, seeing what they can get away with, and establishing a separate code of conduct which applies only to them. Do as I say, but not as I do. I loathe the blatant hypocrisy that is on full display by all levels of government in the United States of America today, because it doesn't represent who we are. That said, the fact that people are tired of politics as usual and the mainstream politicians is a breath of fresh air to me, because it means we have a chance to once again assert what is good and right and decent about this country. But we cannot think of it in terms of instant gratification, because it will certainly not be that. We have to plan through a long-term system to ensure that we get this country back, and that we set it on the right path towards prosperity once again. Each and every one of us has to be dedicated to that. To realize that it may not be in our lifetime, but we will become the new progressives. If they can change the meanings of words, if they can play the games of semantics, then by God, so can we. And we will. We will incrementally step forward and take this country back. We will jab back at them in whatever way possible. We will once again set ourselves on the goal. And the goal is this. The goal is a government that operates within the confines, scope, and application of the United States Constitution. And we strive for that, and we never give up striving for that, and we act upon our fundamental beliefs. If we can do that, and if we can embrace that, then it is only a matter of time before we regain the reins of power and set this country back on its right course. And we set ourselves to that pattern. We dedicate ourselves to it. And we work to it as a passion, because it has to be a driving passion. If we don't have that driving passion, we'll let this country slip back into the patterns of failed policies which have led to mediocrity and are making us teeter on the brink of perpetual failure. But we can't accept that. We have to be just as motivated and driven as those on the other side who have worked tirelessly for well over a century to push the country to the position that it's in today, to tear it down the way that they have. And we have to commit ourselves to not only pushing for a constitutional government again, one that embraces the United States Constitution, we have to embrace the idea that we must expand upon the knowledge that all Americans have with respect to the United States Constitution if we are ever going to wake up future generations to be the standard bearers for the movement. We have to stop thinking just about the here and now, and we have to be able to look into the future. Because if we don't start planning for the future, we are going to be outmaneuvered each and every time by these nefarious political actors that are dedicated to the song and dance that has pushed us to the brink of oblivion and destruction. It's not an easy truth to swallow, but it is one that we must swallow if we are ever to save this country. And I believe that we can. Because I know that in the heart of hearts of decent, hard-working Americans, that we all understand that there is no other free bastion on earth that we can go to. There is no other liberty-loving place in this world. This is it, folks. This is the last frontier of liberty, and if we don't safeguard it, it will be lost forever. Of course, I believe in the American people. I believe in everything that we are capable of. But we have to believe in ourselves as well. And that means each and every one of you. You have to be able to accept what is good for the country and good for you. And that takes commitment. So, what I want us all to do is to take a moment and recommit ourselves to the great things that America is, the things that we believe in, and to recall what a proper scope and application of the Constitution is. And with that said, it is time to begin our descent, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you for joining me on this short little solo flight, and I want you to join me and my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, when we have our next flight next week. We're still working on getting the weekly schedule set up, but we're going to be doing these shows once a week, and I cordially invite you to join us whenever you can. Thank you. This is your Captain Randy Wright, signing off as we land, bringing you radio aviation excellence as we fly over the friendly airwaves in comfort and style.